So I want to start by saying, now I love watching films, I love reading books, but my particular favorite kind of story, whether it's on TV or anywhere, is a story inspired by a true story, okay? Like a piece of fiction or a piece of TV where it's inspired by a true story. So I was watching a film one day, one of my favorite films, and it said, this is inspired by a true story. So I was like, whoa, great. Then when the title started rolling, it said, none of the characters in this film are supposed to be based on real characters. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. So I was like, which is it? Is it inspired by a true story or is it not a true story? And it was a fabulous film. So that's your sort of magic. That's your potion. You take fiction, you bring fiction into history, into recorded mythology, and you created this particular genre. What is your version of this genre that's unique to you?
No, good question. Firstly, the guy who says that this is inspired by true events is usually the author, and the person who writes that, none of these is, etc., etc. Yeah,
Fine
that's a
print.
lawyer of the publisher. Okay. How many of you guys are writers? Yeah. Yeah, publishers, the most irritating group in that publishing company is when you get the legal note, right? Yeah, but this you have to do it, right? Because
Okay.
the publisher has to have that cover when he publishes the book. How do I see my stories? Look, in the Indian tradition, at least, there has never been an approach that this is the truth. And if you don't believe the truth, you're going to be burnt in hell for eternity. We've never had that approach. We've always had an approach which is best exemplified by this wonderful Sanskrit line in the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, that the truth is one, but the wise speak it as many. And Indians didn't just kind of hear this line, they practiced it, which is why you'll find that there are so many versions of the Ramayana. And you can have this pop quiz so often. I mean, if I ask this audience right now, is the Lakshman Rekha there? Actually, let's ask them. Is the Lakshman Rekha, you know what the Lakshman Rekha is, right? It's a line that, at least in the television serial, which is not how it's there in the scriptures, but in the television serial, Lord Lakshman took an arrow and drew that line, and Goddess Sita was not supposed to cross that line. And this is, it's a kind of metaphorical boundary that's put on women. Lakshman Rekha, don't cross this line. So how many of you people think that the Lakshman Rekha is there in the Ramayana? Yeah, a few number, okay. And how many of you think the Lakshman Rekha is not there in the Ramayana? Yeah, equal number. And someone out here asked the correct question, which Ramayana? Applause for her.
Linda.
And if you'd notice, I raise my hands both the times, right? Because it depends on which Ramayana you're reading, right? But in the original Valmiki Ramayana, there is no Lakshman Rekha, right? And this is just one example. There are many examples like this. So the concept of taking the soul of the old and creating a new version with respect to the old has been around in India for centuries, for millennia, right? So this is not something new in a way. In every age, there are attempts to relook at these stories for a few reasons. One, we Indians can never tire of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Puranas. We just want to hear these stories again and again and again and again. But we want to hear our own interpretation of it. In our own every generation has its own interpretation of it. And the second thing is because every generation is facing its own challenges. So the story is adapted to reflect the challenges of that generation. What are the philosophies that you need to learn in this generation, right? So the version that you guys would have read where the Lakshman Rekha is mentioned is there actually in the Ramcharitmanas, which was composed by Goswami Tulsidas ji. 16th century, a time when India was under attack by foreign invaders, a time of random violence, a time when any society which suffers a lot of random violence tends to become more and more patriarchal. But the version of the Ramayana that was written thousands of years ago, like the Adbhut Ramayana, when there were no foreign invasions, when India was a very equal society, has goddess Sita as a warrior. She is the one who kills Ravan, right? In that version. The women should applaud for this at least. And those who are interested, check it out, Adbhut Ramayan. I think it is available on the web. It's way past copyright, so it's available legally out of on the web. But yeah, there are various versions like this, and it reflects the age that it was adapted in.
And in the case of mythology and our epics that are told and retold, in fact, the way I read the Mahabharata was because my grand aunt, who was staying with us at the time, every day after school she'd say, I can't read, so you read it to me. And my sister and I would take turns, and we would read her for chapters.
How lucky
and
was that?
Yeah, but we would crib about it. But then I read the whole Mahabharata that way, and in the middle we checked to see if she was asleep. I was just making it up along the way. So I did it before you did. But but in terms of history, see, epics have been told and retold by different tellers and experienced that way. In terms of histories, which are more, to a certain extent, written, and of course, there's versions of histories, how do you bring your fiction in? And again, you're not the only one who does historical fiction, but what's your way of doing historical fiction where, we know that it didn't quite end up the way it ended for your characters in your book, it didn't end in real life. What is your way of tackling, bringing your fiction in? How do you do it?
So historical fiction as a genre has been around for long.
Exactly. How do you do it your way?
And I think real life and historical fiction, there are two ways to look. There are a few different ways to look at it. Among the lines I had really liked about it is the difference between historical fiction and real life is historical fiction is supposed to make sense. Real life usually makes no sense. And many of the things, actually, I'm reading this, I don't know how many of you guys have heard of this British historian called David Starkey, magisterial books on the British monarchy. The story of King Charles, as was told of, 400, 500 years ago, a lot of it actually doesn't make sense. Why did he do what he did, right? But if one wrote a character like that in fiction, it was, this story makes no sense. The character is behaving out of character. So historical fiction is actually supposed to make sense. That's one difference, I think. Secondly, historical fiction has to have an ending, right? Real life doesn't have an ending. Things just carry on, right? So by its very nature, someone who writes on historical fiction has to interpret the facts differently. You can't make obvious errors, right? So if I'm writing a book on the Chola Tigers, okay, Emperor Rajendra Chola against Mahmud Ghazni, I can't show Emperor Akbar as a character. That makes no sense because Emperor Rajendra Chola lived 1,000 years ago, but Akbar lived only 500 years ago. That makes absolutely no sense. That's wrong. But of course, you'll make some adaptations, as long as the broad facts are right. And this is true, how many of you have seen Braveheart? Yeah, so William Wallace did exist. Scotland did fight for its independence, but I assure you, William Wallace did not have an affair with a French princess who went on to become the English queen. That did not happen, right? But that obviously adds drama to the story. Now, these are things anyone who writes historical fiction does that. And you just have to make clear at the beginning of the book or the movie that this is fiction. That's where the lawyers help.
Okay. Do you feel that when you write about revenge and characters and players mete out that revenge, that in this case it's called a righteous revenge very often in the book, and there is barbarism that leads to deep anger, hurt, pain, and death. And there's a sense that there has to be a righteous revenge, that characters carry out that revenge. Do you feel in the fictional writing of characters in general that carry out revenge, and when audiences, whether it is through cinema or through books, experience that sometimes that revenge in a fictional platform, does it meet a need to express an anger in a way that could not have been expressed and that would be completely criminal in real life to do. It's, righteous revenge would be a crime today, but does it satisfy a part of one's anger that can be safely meted out in fiction, where it would be criminal, to use just one word, in life?
You make a good point. And this will perhaps need a slightly longer answer, because one will also need to explain the way some of these issues have actually been addressed in India. There was a movie called Inglorious Bastards. I don't know how many of you guys saw that movie. And of course, I mean, in the Western context, many would have understood what the aim of such a movie would be. Look, history in India has been presented. I don't know how many of you grew up in India. If you, okay, most of you, great, or a large number. Those who you would have seen the way history was presented to us in a few perspectives. One, there was a very heavy focus on Delhi and its environment. The rest of India was broadly just ignored. Particularly the history of the last 1,000 and 1,500 years. South India, I don't know how many of you are South Indians, there would have been 2 or 3 chapters saying, meanwhile in the South, right? But the rest is all just Delhi. But South India at least got a meanwhile in the South, right? Central India, East India, Western India are all ignored. Apparently, only things worth happened around Delhi, right? Which gives us an inadequate understanding of the entire land. That's one aspect. Second aspect that I found mischievous was that British colonial rule is not called the Christian invasion, but the Turkic colonial rule is called the Islamic invasion in our history books, which I found very mischievous. It is almost like an attempt to create divisions today for what may have happened in the past. The invaders themselves, and they were all largely from Central Asia, right? The Turks. They were actually Turkic, most of them. They themselves self-identified as Turkic. Our Indian kings who wrote of them also wrote of them as often, like Chhatrapati Shivaji or Krishnadev Raya, or even the Adil Shahis wrote of those guys as Turuksha, which is Sanskrit for Turks, right? This created divisions within modern India. And the third thing that happened was the history of the last 1,000 years is shown as a history of defeats, one after the other. And a question that arisen in my mind, when I was in school and college, that if our ancestors were losing every single battle, why the hell are we still alive? We should have been dead, right? Because the same invaders who came to India went to many other lands as well. The Portuguese, yes, came to India, but they went to Central America as well. Incas, Aztecs, all dead. The Central Asian tribes came to India, but they went to the Arab lands as well. That was the destruction of the high point of Arab Islamdom, which is the Abbasid Caliphate. It got destroyed again by these same invaders. Across the world, most ancient cultures died out. Our culture did not. And then to me, that's the third point that I want to make. Then the interpretation is, yes, we lost some battles. We won many battles as well. And most critically, our ancestors never surrendered. The last 1,000 years, in my opinion perhaps, is the greatest resistance movement in Indian history, in human history actually, the Indian ancestors fighting. It's the greatest resistance movement by any indigenous group of people against foreign invaders. We need to showcase that, and we also need to make it very, very clear. This has nothing to do with people today. Because if you don't address those issues, then that poison goes into nonsense today. Which is why you'll find, and that's the last point I want to make, that in these books, I have its It's Indians fighting foreign invaders. It's not Hindu-Muslim. The group of Indian resistance fighters have Hindus and Muslims. You'll notice there was a woman fighter as well. I'm inclusive that way. Because I don't want this to be a cause for internal divisions today.
You've been very particular
But,
to say that,
but
yes.
ignoring what happened in the past, just like America is also learning, just ignoring painful episodes of history does not make it go away. It just, unfortunately, just comes out as poison in various other ways. But then we also have to be very clear that while discussing those painful historical periods, it has nothing to do with people today. So, in fact, I'd written an article on this in one of my books, Immortal India, that I, as an Indian, very obviously dislike Winston Churchill, right? I don't know how many of you are aware, there was a man-made famine, actually, that happened in 1942 in India. Estimates vary, but between 2.5 to 4 million of, at least those of us who grew up in India, of our fellow Indians, were, frankly, you can say killed, right? In that period, it was known today as the Great Bengal famine. And there are notations, Madhushree Mukherjee had written a book on this. There are notations that Winston Churchill had written in the files, that when files were going to him that Indians are dying in this famine. He written something, if I don't remember the exact words, but something like, serves them for breeding like rabbits, and they're a beastly people, following a beastly religion. Now, obviously, I as an Indian don't like Winston Churchill. But at the same time, and I wrote this in their article, in India, that I can understand the right of a British person to respect Winston Churchill, right? Because at least for them, he was a hero. Fair enough. For me, not so much, right? But this is what then peaceful historical conversation ends up being. And Indians cannot blame today's British for what Winston Churchill or Robert Clive or the British Raj may have done. That's silly, right? But we should speak of the past. That's the only way to make our peace with it. I guess that's what I'm trying to do through historical fiction, but without causing dissonance today. That serves no purpose. That, in fact, is harmful. Thank you.
And you've said that many a time in Chola Tigers too, and when you talk about it. We saw your trailer and you just mentioned one of your characters. There's some really, each character is very strong and follows there's romance, there's everything in there. Tell me, I was going to ask you about all your books, but maybe I'll just ask you about this one. If you could step into the world of one of your characters, do you have a favorite character from the characters who you've created, that you have recreated? Do you have a favorite? Do you have some you're partial to? Who are they? Why do they resonate with you?
Yeah, firstly, I should say I don't actually feel I create my characters. It's like, I know it sounds strange sometimes, but I genuinely believe it. It's the blessings of Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is the god I worship. If you're an atheist, you can believe it's the blessings of the universe. But anyone who writes a story, if he's honest, you can't really explain where it comes from. It just comes. It's a blessing. And every character that one witnesses as a writer, I genuinely believe you don't create, you witness, actually. Every character that you witness is special, but particularly in the Chola Tigers. So the book was nearly done a year back, and I was set to submit it to HarperCollins. They had put it into their budgets as well, and then there was this particular character, and I was like editing it, coming to the end, and I was like, no, this character is talking to me. He wants. He needs a different arc, a different character arc. And I kept trying to resist it. Damn it, I'm done with this already. I have too many other things to do. There's a documentary shoot coming up. And I just couldn't kind of help myself. I said, no, actually, this character's story has to change. And this character was a very important character, which meant I had to go back to the beginning and rewrite much of the book all over again. And I did that, and I told HarperCollins sorry. And I remember Anand telling me, "Bugger, I'm losing my this year's bonus." But and I'm glad I took that extra year, because now I really love this character now. The arc that he has, and the central character all the way through. At the beginning, you think like he's an absolute a-hole, and by the end you realize, you understand why he's done everything that he's done, and you get such a deep. It's like the last scene that I wrote on that character, where he gets what he needed so desperately. I was actually crying when I wrote, and I'm so glad I just rewrote that entire book for this character. And when you guys read the book, it'll be obvious who that character was.
That's very committed to that feeling you had. You committed to it, and you went with it, even if it took an extra year.
And it was all linked to just one line that he said. Like, I got this line from him. He just says, "Her name was Sarah." Okay, and that line was just so powerful. I was crying when I was writing, and then I just had to go back and rewrite everything to end up at that line where he says that.
Yeah.
Her name was Sarah.
He's a very beautiful character, and he's your best character. From my personal read of that book, it was very beautiful. I don't want to say it to everyone who's about to read it, who hasn't yet.
Yeah, because I'm hoping they're going to buy it and read the book.
Tell me, Amish, when you write, I know that it's been 15 years since you've been writing. How have you changed? We know that in the beginning you had to struggle to publish this first manuscript, you stuck with it, then it became this bestseller, then the second one came out, then you said you knew that by now you're going to be able to, can be your new job, you can be a professional writer. You've been doing it 15 years. How has your work changed you over these 15 years? How has your writing changed you? How has your writing changed?
I was a banker, actually. I mean, my friend Shekhar, he was an accountant. As Sanjoy just brought out from him, and I used to be a banker. My apologies. And I was a very, very typical middle-class boy in India. In those days, I'm 50 years old. So, did BSc Mathematics, did my MBA from IIM Calcutta, joined banking, worked for 14 years in banking, and I had this idea for a book. So I wrote my first book. It was rejected by every publisher. I self-published it. It just took off. But I still wasn't sure. What if there's a fluke? So I waited for the second book. When that did well and the royalty check became more than the salary, I resigned only at that time. Very boring, very pragmatic. And the Indians know, look, this is how we work, okay? You must have the next boat ready before you jump off. But to the key point of the question that you raised, I think writing has, it didn't change my world, it changed me, which is, I think, a much bigger miracle. My character has turned 180 degrees. Look, I was very typical, MBA banker type profile, very hyper competitive, insecure. I used to shout and scream a lot. No matter what bonus I got, I thought I was underpaid. When I got a promotion, I was among the youngest senior management committee members in our life. My last job was in life insurance. It doesn't get more boring than that. But it paid well. But I got into that CXO role, and I was thinking, actually, I should have been given this 3 years back. I wasn't celebrating. Right? I was just that typical hyper-competitive, insecure, nothing is good enough. So you do well in life, but you're not basically... it's not happiness. Happiness is kind of a superficial emotion. You're not at peace, right? And what happened with my writing is that my character has kind of transformed by 180 degrees. I'm at peace. Um, I've rediscovered faith. What I had is, I grew up in a very traditional household. So I'd become an atheist, but I've kind of rediscovered faith. I'm much calmer now. And I passed through this very difficult 7-8 years from 2015 to 2022. In my personal life, career kept going better and better, but my personal life was much more critical for me. And these things happen, and our entire family went through it. But I think if I was still that banking person, I wouldn't have been able to handle this very, very difficult phase. I would have probably gone through God knows what all trouble. But since I'm much more at peace now, one just look, you have to suffer what there is to suffer. Life is life. I mean, it happens. Who doesn't face problems in life? It's all of us have our ups and downs. But I think I could, and our entire family, we could handle it, manage it together, get through what had to be gotten through. And I think spirituality, roots, strong family bonds, these things really kind of ground you, and you can get through the difficult times. None of us will escape it. There are always times when you just feel you're drowning. What gets you through is your family, spirituality, roots. That's what gets you through. My books help me rediscover that. My brother's here, my wife is here. They're much more grounded people. I was one of those really very typical MBA types, but I think the books have really brought me back. Yeah.
Amish, we'll soon be coming to the questions, and I just wanted to ask you, what is your creative angst? Like, I know now you're no longer angsty about the things you were when you were a banker, but now you're a writer, and there's a lot of it's tough being a writer. There's creative
No, it's not. It's
struggle.
a good life, man.
It's a
damn good life.
It's a good life.
You get to
because
do what
you're a bestseller.
You get to do what you love, and you get paid for it, man. Nothing can be better.
But don't you ever struggle creatively? No? Wow.
It just comes. It's
Wow.
12 books, 15 years. There was just this one phase in life, 2018, where I think for a month or two, and that was perhaps the lowest point in my life. I was really very, very troubled at that time for some 1-2 months. That otherwise it's usually on tap. I just open the laptop and this universe just opens up, and I just record what I see. I can actually just see it, and I record what I see. But for those 1-2 months, nothing was coming. And I swear I was thinking, shit, how much worse can things get that even this is going now? But yeah, there was a long incident. Something happened. Ashish and I were watching TV, and some music just helped, just kind of just break that. That's the only time. Otherwise, I've never had writer's block ever. I'm
think
lucky.
You certainly are. It sounds like it. I've never, that's wonderful that you don't struggle with your art and it comes to you. Wonderful for you. Before I open it to the audience, I wanted to just ask you one very quick question, which is, do you feel a sense of responsibility to the many, many young readers that you have when you spin your tales, your gripping tales where everyone's going to keep coming back to you? What sense of responsibility do you feel?
I think that's a sense of responsibility that any person in the public space must have. If you're in the public space, particularly if you're a storyteller, look, if you're a storyteller, then others give you something that is most precious, which is not their money. It's never your money. It's your attention. And if someone is receiving that, then do some good with it. Now, at least I think that you should at least try and get across some philosophy, some thoughts. Doesn't matter if you agree with it or not, but at least do something positive with that attention that you've been blessed with. Because if you see the law of dharma, karma, if I've been given the blessing of writing something that others are reading, and if I use that privilege to push a conversation in a negative direction, can you imagine the negative karma that will come on me? Right? So it's not something good that you're doing, it's in your own soul's selfish interest. Try and do something positive with it. This is something I think every filmmaker, storyteller, writer, musician, uh, I, you don't have to make it boring, right? Make it fun, right? But try and do something positive with it, not something negative.
I'm sure the audience has questions for you, Amish, so I'll let them have
Thank
the
you.
mic.
And hopefully there's a mic going around. I'm sorry, I can't see very clearly. The light is really sharp. Yeah. Ah, ah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, I would like to challenge a couple of points that you made and
course.
see what your response is. The first is that you said, nobody in India has ever said you must believe in only one version of this. And I immediately thought
I was
of,
talking about our ancestors.
as far as what?
Our ancestors. Our ancestors didn't have that point of view.
Yeah, well, then maybe I'm talking about through history, including today. Anyway, we do have people who are oppressing and suppressing varieties of versions of the Ramayana, but if you're talking about the ancient past, then we'll let that one go. I'll go to my second point, where you suggested that, I mean, that was a pretty powerful imagery in that trailer we watched. You said, oh, this isn't about Muslims, this is about Turks. And it doesn't have anything to do with people in India today. I would really like to challenge that. It's very hard for me to believe that when that imagery of Muslims desecrating and tearing down a temple, and then the Hindus going fiercely for vengeance plays completely into the current political cultural narrative of demolition of mosques and Hindu vengeance against historical imagined defeats. It plays into that narrative, you don't think so?
Okay, you make a good point. Let me answer this from a few perspectives. Because part of the idea for this actually happened through a documentary that I'd done. I'd interviewed this legendary Indian archaeologist called K.K. Mohammed Saab. The name itself will tell you he's a Muslim, an Indian Malayali Muslim. And he told me this, and it's on camera. He told me something very beautiful. He said, Babur was an Uzbek. I'm an Indian Muslim. What do I have to do with him? And he said that, in fact, he made this point, that this was an Indian foreigner issue, which has been converted into a Hindu-Muslim issue. And a large part of it is through history created during the British Raj. Like I said, if the British colonial rule is not called the Christian invasion, why is the Turkic colonial rule called the Islamic invasion? And sadly, this version of history continued post-1947. Now, this conversation is happening today in any case in India. And regrettably, because those of us in the center who believe in Indian unity are not speaking on it, the conversation is hijacked by extremes on both sides. There's a line in Hindi. I'll try my best to translate it, but any translation I do will be inadequate. But the Indians will understand this, that between the left-wing extremists and the right-wing extremists, Ram banaye jodi, right? That Lord Ram has made this perfect relationship because the left-wing extremists and the right-wing extremists need each other, because they need each other as the, as to set up like this is the perfect enemy and get us stuck in that conversation. This conversation is happening in India already. If we stay silent, we let that nonsense narrative become the narrative for everyone. Staying silent does not help. And speaking untruth also does not help. Might as well speak the truth of what happened, but point it out. Like in the US also, like there are historical conversations happening now. But among the things that troubles me as an outsider, I'm not an Indian American, I'm an Indian Indian. But among the things that I see in the West, that historical crimes are used to paint people today and create fights today because it helps political forces. The solution is not to speak of those historical crimes. You should speak of those historical crimes. The solution is how to speak of it in a way that you're not creating problems today. That is what I actually learned from KK Mohammed Saab. And actually, let me just answer that first question of yours also as well, because there are so many texts which repeatedly say of speak of multiple truths. I quoted the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Viprabhavda Vadanti, truth is one, but the wise speak it as many. There's another one, Hari Ananta, Hari Katha Ananta, that the gods are many and their tales are even more numerous. But even more, it's only an Indian Muslim who could have said, या तो मस्जिद में शराब पीने दे साकी, या ऐसी जगह बता जहाँ खुदा ना हो. And all the Indians would have understood the beauty of this line. These are the things that need to be brought out. In today's India, you can go to a Venkateshwara Mandir, Venkateshwara temple in South India. You can Google those pictures. You'll find women, Muslim women in burqas coming and praying at a Hindu temple, right? Now, these things are not brought up in our stories because they don't serve a purpose. In Haji Ali Dargah, the city that I live in Mumbai, it's the tomb of a Muslim Sufi saint. Outside of a Friday, majority of the people there are Hindus. These are the things that need to be brought out. Sticking our head in the sand and saying that those things didn't happen is not going to make the problem go away. In fact, it will inject even more poison in today's day. I'll just end with one last line, sorry. I love quoting my parents, they were really brilliant people. And my father had told me this, that the answer to religious extremists usually cannot be provided by atheists. It's usually provided by religious liberals who actually bring out the positive liberal interpretations. That is needed.
Do we have time for one more question?
Amishji, is there a risk that historical fiction could become history? As in, like, like how do writers of historical fiction self-regulate? So, for example, you talked about Lakshman Rekha. So there is this proverbial Lakshman Rekha. So if I use Mahabharata and then paint Karna as the good guy, or if I use Ramayana and paint Ravan as a good guy, and that version becomes widely popular, is there any kind of loss in that process? If there is, how does the writer self-regulate?
You make a good point, man. And there are times I have read historical fiction or interpretations of our epics, which in my view at least are negative, right? And are not helping the India of today or the world of today. And you find this across the world. And that's a problem with real life, that choices are often not easy, because this clashes with my deep belief in freedom of expression, right? It's very easy to defend speech that you like or a version that you like. The most difficult thing is actually to defend a version that you don't like. And as a principle, at least I believe that, there are societies which don't give primacy to freedom of expression, right? Ancient India was not one of those societies. You only have to read the Natya Shastra, which is our seminal text for performing arts. And the case that is made for freedom of expression by Lord Brahma himself, the creator God, right? Which is where the challenge is. So I agree with you that there are versions I've read today, which trouble me. But that clashes with my strong belief in freedom of expression. Because if someone is going to decide that this version is okay, this version is not okay, then you're giving power to an individual, a group. And who's to say that individual or group will have the right aims? Who's to say that individual or group will not be corrupted? And that's a very slippery slope. Right? So my attitude always is, I genuinely believe that the answer to a book that you don't like is you write a book. The answer to a movie that you don't like, write a movie. That is usually the best answer. It's a much more difficult path to take, but it's for the longer term, it's much better than wanting to regulate something that you don't like. Trust me, that's a very slippery slope. And then it's a question of someone else then taking that regulatory power and blocking you too, right? Which is, trust me, not a good idea. Are we done, I guess, or I don't know, up to you.
It says that...
I'm standing between them and drinks, so...
Does it say time's up?
Time's up.
Time's up, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you,
drinks are
Amish.
coming up.
Thank you so much for being here today.
So
Thank
let me
you.
take a quick moment just to thank you so much. The question earlier, I think of this book, Many Ramayanas. You probably know that, Paula Richmond's book, and how the Ramayana has come to life in so many different parts of Asia, whether you're talking about Indonesia or Sri Lanka or Burma. That becomes something of that place. So it's very powerful, and to understand that the plurality is in fact its power is something that I feel you spoke to. Thank you so much.